All right. Welcome back, Scissors and Scrubs. I'm getting back to basics here with a little death and destruction.
Your favorite.
You know how I love a good story of death and destruction.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Someone wrote in about this, right?
They wrote about yours.
Yeah.
And then I tagged mine on.
Right.
Because I just like the story. I love the story.
Another listener suggestion.
I'm telling you guys, you're getting us through.
Mm-hmm.
So, you are covering...
The Knickabocka Theater.
I just like the name. The Knickabocka.
I mean, it's really perfect for us. Knickabocka Theater.
Knickabocka. Well, and there was the show, The Nick. On
Oh, yeah.
And I only saw season 1, but I fucking loved it. It was great.
Yeah, a lot of people like that.
That was a great show. Was it Clive Owen was the doctor? Oh, it was good. It was very good.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. All right, so anyway, Knickabocka.
The Knickabocka. All right, you want me to go?
I do. I want you to go for it, Knickabocka.
All right. The Knickabocka Theater opened in 1917.
Oh.
It was DC's...
One.
In Washington, D.C. It was DC's largest picture house. It was decorated like wicked ornately with ivory and gold, like this beautiful, beautiful theater. It was used for concerts and lectures, but most famously and most popularly, it was used for showing silent films accompanied by an orchestra. So they would, back then, it was, there was all silent films. No.
How funny that would be. And they'd put the words up after what they were saying.
So it's a big stage because they do other things on it, and it has the, screen. And then they would show the silent film, and then there's an orchestra pit in front of it, and the orchestra plays music to the, So if it's a comedy, they play funny music. If it's scary, they play scary music. It held 1,700 people. It had seats for 1,700 people. So it was a really big theater. On January 27th, 1922, the largest snowstorm to ever hit Washington, D.C. to date began.
Oh, wow.
By noon on January 28th, over 18 inches had fallen.
Ooh, that's
and by 9 p.m. on the 28th, over 2 feet had accumulated.
Oh, that's a lot.
By the end of the storm on January 29th, 28 inches had fallen in D.C. And of course, just like the blizzard of 78 or other huge storms, it was like, it might rain, it might snow. Like
you're talking 1922, too.
No one was expecting.
The weather was, stick a sheet out the window, see what happens to it.
On the night of January 28th, the Knickabocka was showing Get Rich Quick, Wallingford, which
Wallingford,
which was a silent comedy film.
It's such a silent comedy film name. Wallingford.
Around, of course, everything differs, like the numbers of people there that night differ. Around 3.
Who's going out in 3 feet of fucking snow to go to a silent picture show?
Saying it was like the end of the storm, and they were showing this, and it was like in this really, like it was in kind of like an affluent neighborhood in DC. They were like, everybody from the neighborhood could just walk. No one drove. Like they all
still 3 feet of snow and those skirts and shit.
They were probably like, just get out of the house. Something to do. They're going inside. Like
Knickabocka.
So around 300 to 500 people were in attendance that night because again, it was a snowstorm, so not like 1,700 people weren't there. All right, so just after intermission at 9 p.m., there was a loud hissing noise that sounded like sheets ripping, like that.
Yeah.
And a stream of dust falls from the ceiling into the orchestra pit. Oh. Some people noticed it and got up. Almost everybody didn't pay any attention to it. The orchestra's playing. No one's like, what's happening? They just heard the noise, saw a little dust, and didn't really think much of it. However, that noise was the roof splitting directly down the middle.
Oh my God.
In a split second. Like literally they heard that. There was a little dust, nothing. In a split second, the entire roof collapses into the theater. The entire roof.
From all the weight of the snow?
Yeah. It took the balcony down as it collapsed.
Oh my God.
The roof and then the balcony all collapsed. The collapse was heard and felt throughout the whole neighborhood. Like people came running outside. What was that noise? What was that sound? There was this huge roar from the collapse. Right. Then there was, they said, like complete silence. And then just screams and moans and agony and people yelling for help. There were hundreds of people trapped under the tons of steel, bricks, wood, and snow. The ceiling and balcony hit the floor so forcefully that it blew the windows and doors out of the theater and ejected at least 2 people from the theater, which then saved their lives.
God bless, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people were killed instantly, obviously, from being crushed. But hundreds were severely injured and trapped under all of this debris. One man was found sitting. He's in his chair, sitting up, eyes wide open when they get in there. But he's dead because he had a massive heart attack from, like, everything around him. It was just, he was in this little teeny pocket.
Just can't even...
No. They said like just the way the beams fell
Yeah,
over him.
he was
in
fine.
this little complete pocket, sitting in his goddamn chair.
But
Dead.
had a heart attack.
Yeah. Major George Patton.
Oh, George Patton.
Yep, of the U.S. Army. Yes,
Like the George Patton.
George Patton was called out of his sickbed while recovering from an allergic reaction to seafood.
Yeah, I die.
To lead the rescue effort. So he's just a major.
The
at this
George
point.
Patton.
The
Oh
George
my God.
Patton. It was obviously extremely chaotic when it first happens. There's, survivors that could get out, got out, and volunteers just from people in the neighborhood all around. They're trying to get people out of there. By midnight, 200 police officers, soldiers, and firefighters were on the scene. And by 6:30 a.m., there were 600 rescuers there.
Wow.
Ambulances from Walter Reed were used to take patients to all area hospitals. Like every hospital near there had patients from this. They had to use naval equipment. Like they went to the naval base and got like hydraulic lifts and stuff because just steel beams are on top of these people. They can't get them. So they had to go get naval equipment to lift the beams up. It took until noon on January 29th to free everyone.
Wow.
So they're sitting there in freezing cold, in a snowstorm, no roof, in the snow, under steel, under bricks.
Ooh.
It was awful. 98 people died and 133 were injured in this tragedy.
That's almost everybody in there.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah,
There's only
because if
300
it's 3 to
people,
500, yeah, that's, majority.
Right.
So here's the few of the people that died. Agnes Mellon had just like run into the theater with her boyfriend. Like they were coming in and, they came from work or wherever. They run in to catch the show with her boyfriend, James Hoffman. They literally run in and the roof collapses.
Oh.
So the force that blew out the doors and windows blows James out into the lobby.
But not her.
And she is crushed to death. She was ID'd in the morgue, ironically, by her khaki Knickerbocker pants. She had on pants that were like baggy pants, and they called them Knickerbockers, and that's what she was wearing that night, and that's how they ID'd her. Oh. And they said that's how they ID'd a lot of people because they were so crushed. They couldn't identify them, but it would be like, oh, that was her dress, or those were her pants. Or that's how they would have to identify people. They said when they, they're trying to get these people out, but they were in there for hours and hours and hours under all this stuff. They would send in little boys with cups of water to crawl under all this shit. Can you imagine sending kids into?
Could you imagine how much safer it would have been too? Because this shit's not stable.
No, obviously, like it's like
and
insane.
You're putting kids in there to give
and opium pills to give to the people that were screaming. They would give these little kids
because they didn't want to hear the screaming
to just come. Well, let them die. I don't know, but like they would send them in with opium pills and water into the people that were trapped under this shit.
My God.
The orchestra conductor Ernesto Nutella.
Nutella.
I know, not really, but died instantly. But his wife escaped with minor injuries.
So bizarre.
Violin player Joseph Bale was on the 4th day of his honeymoon when Natello convinced him to come in and play that night because they were like, "Listen, we're down because not everybody can get in." So the people who
he was on his honeymoon.
I know, but there was like usually 20 people in the orchestra, but because of the snowstorm, only like 9 people could make it in. So he called him because he lived nearby, and he's like, "Can you just come in?" Like, blah 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 blah. So he does. But his new wife decided to stay home and not go in. Bale was crushed to death. Charles Lyman was 17, and he was a star athlete who played baseball and basketball. He attended the Knickerbocker almost every Saturday after his games with his teammates. He died that night, making him one of the youngest victims of the Knickerbocker. Frank's grandmother and many other families sued the theater for negligence, but none of them received money ever.
Because they didn't know. What negligence? Because were they supposed to shovel the roof off?
Well, no, I'll get into it.
Okay. Sorry.
Obviously, they investigate what the hell, how did this happen? And even though there was faulty construction found, the building did meet the codes of the day. Originally, Reginald Green, who was the architect, and 4 others were charged with involuntary manslaughter. But they were never convicted. They were like, they met the codes. Like, should it have been better? Yes, but they met all the codes, so they were never.
The code should be better.
Right. So they were never held, like, responsible, really. Reginald, though, lost his career. Obviously, no one hired him as an architect, and he committed suicide 5 years later.
Oh.
Harry Crandall was the owner of the Knickerbocker and, like, a bunch of other theaters around that area. He falls into financial ruin. Like, he's kind of, like, done. And he committed suicide 10 years after. They both did it by turning on the gas in their stoves. DC building codes were changed after this tragedy, obviously. They then, so after the tragedy, they mandated steel I-beams and better support for roofs. They did not have mandates for steel.
What were they using, do you know?
Yeah, at the Knickabocka, the steel roof beams just rested directly on top of the brick walls. So they just laid a piece of steel across the brick wall. Like,
so it just collapsed.
So yeah, there was nothing holding them in place. Like they were just laying there. And it was a flat roof.
Yeah.
So you had almost 3 feet of snow, and it was a wet snow, they said, because like the beginning of the storm was like 19 degrees. By the end of the storm it was like 31 degrees. Yeah. So it was getting wicked wet and wicked heavy. So yeah, the Knickabocka, the steel roof beams literally rested directly on top of the brick. So those collapse in, the brick walls collapse in, the balcony collapses down within a second. The Knickabocka Theater collapse is the deadliest disaster to occur in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And I got this information from a YouTube video called The Knickabocka Theater Collapse, a short documentary on fascinating horror. The Kevin Sheehan Show, which is a podcast. It's called the DC Sports Podcast. And that episode was called DC's Worst Disaster. And a Smithsonian Magazine article by Kelly Gormley titled When a Winter Storm Triggered One of the Deadliest Disasters in DC History.
Bum, bum, bum. Mm-hmm. Oh, Wallingford, look what you caused.
I know.
Well, Laura, if you're going to do a collapse, well, then I'm going to do a collapse. And that's how it rolls on this podcast. So I'm doing the Kansas City collapse. Nah. Okay.
This is one of the most awful things I've ever
So
heard.
I had heard of this. I think My Favorite Murder did a podcast on it.
Yeah, I think I heard that one, and I watched something one time.
I got my information from Second by Second on A&E. I wrote it down somewhere, but I don't remember where. It was like a 5-part thing, Second by Second on A&E, and it covers the Kansas City collapse. I also got it from another article, but I don't think I cited it, so you're just going to have to deal with it. All right. Okay. Kansas City collapse. Here we go.
Okay, ready.
In 1978, I was 5 years old. Kansas City starts building a beautiful state-of-the-art hotel, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in the midst of a lot of building of all around the country. People are building, and they're renovating and making things really new and state-of-the-art in a real big hurry.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing these things. So
it usually ends up very well.
If you look at this time period, there were a lot of collapses and destruction of stuff that was kind of built shoddy. So the Hyatt Regency Hotel is going to be 40 stories high. There is a 4-story high atrium with glass ceilings and floating walkways that connect from like one building to the other. They're probably 125 feet. And there's a walkway on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor. The 4th and 2nd floor are above each other. The 3rd floor is offset.
Okay.
And so it's like if you had 3 of them and you pulled one out to the side. During construction of this hotel, the atrium roof where these things are collapses. An inspection team is brought in to investigate the roof collapse, but they don't look at anything else that's going on in the hotel, just at the roof. They fix it. Done. The design of the walkways in the atrium, as I said, they're offsetting walkways. And originally, they were going to be held, the 4th and 2nd floor walkways, which are stacked above each other, were going to be held by one continuous rod from the 2nd one up through the 4th one, and they would be bolted to the ceiling.
The one that collapsed before it opened?
Yes, exactly. That same one. Yes, they're going to be bolted to the ceiling. They figured that they don't like this design flaw, and what they're going to do instead is they want to, like a rod to the 4th floor, it would connect, and then the box would come out and rods would connect down to the 2nd floor. So now they're offset as well. And they contact Jack Gillum, who is the designer of these walkways, if they could use 2 sets of rods offsetting to support the walkways. And he's like, yeah, you can go ahead and do that. No problem. And the hotel is completed July 1st, 1980. Now, this back and forth with these walkways, it's a lot of phone calls, and it will come into play later. The hotel opens up, huge reviews in, we're talking Kansas City. There's not fucking happy. I've been to Kansas City. I had not a lot to do in Kansas City.
So this is like the it place.
This was the it place to do in 1980. And they host all kinds of events. One of their big events that they have is a tea dance on Friday nights. Now, a tea dance in 1981 for a World War II vet and his wife is the equivalent of us going to a 1980s dance and thinking it's the best.
Right.
It was only like, I was doing the math, I think it's like a 35-year difference from 1945 to 1981.
Right.
And when you think of that, you're like, holy shit, because it's only 30. Yeah, it's the same of us to,
the 80s.
1987. Yeah. So this thing is a really, really big event. And so July 17th, 1981, they're holding one of their big tea parties. It's such a big event that they have the news media there covering these tea parties. And it's like, it's the early 80s. So they all have those like dresses on, like kind of wrap dresses and the big glasses and the really fixed hairdos. And they're all doing their little fucking jitterbugs and shit, dancing around. And the dance floor is packed. So you have the big atrium. You have the walkways are set. If you were to walk into this atrium, you have escalators on either side, off to the left and right. And in the back are the walkways in the glass, floor to ceiling, 4-story glass windows. And the atriums are overlooking the dance floors. So Chuck Hayes and his wife are there. Mark Williams is there checking things out. He's hanging out. Dalton Grant 11 and his mother Connie are getting drinks from the bar, which is under the walkways. He's 11 years old. He's probably getting a Shirley Temple.
Oh, it's like his last name was 11?
Yeah, no, he's 11. Dalton Grant, he's 11 years old. And this news reporter, he's covering this. So the people are on these walkways and they are packed full of people watching the packed dance floor. At 7:05, and you can hear it. It's, like if you were to hit metal and it goes boing, that's what you hear. You have boing,
they're letting go.
and people they said they saw the walkways kind of shimmy and kaboom, like the fourth falls onto the second and they both collapse down onto the dance floor. And you don't see that. I could not find one video, and they had to have gotten it on tape. But I could not find one video.
God bless them for not putting that out there.
You know how I would fucking
you're a sick
watch it.
person.
I would have to see it. They said, the guy that they were interviewing, he's like, I was this news reporter. I really wanted that juicy story, and I'm covering the fucking tea dance at the Hyatt. He goes, and the next thing I know, I'm watching people jumping off of these walkways and trying to escape. So, They collapse onto each other. Someone eating on the 42nd floor of I guess it was more than 40 stories high. He was eating at like a Spinnaker hotel at the top. Said it felt like an explosion. He could feel it on the 42nd floor. So when the walkways collapse, it sets off the sprinkler system, which is filling the lobby with water. And all the electrical work now is sparking into this water. Okay. The cameraman, Chuck Hayes and his wife were there. He was a cameraman, I forgot to say. They are trapped from the waist down by the walkways. Oh. Many people are like half out, half under. He says, he's sitting in this dirty, filthy water. It was gray, and then all of a sudden it started turning red. And they're, obviously on the camera you can see everybody screaming and everything, and rescue people like immediately are starting to go and trying to find out what's going on. He is like, when the firefighters come in, they thought the rug was red, and they realized, no, that's the color of the water. So poor little Dalton Grant and his mother are trapped there are 31 people trapped underneath the walkways. He has a crushing pelvic injury, and his mother has 2 broken legs. She was an ER nurse, and he just remembers his mother saying the whole time, don't go to sleep, don't go to sleep, don't go to sleep. Mark Williams is in the space the size of a suitcase.
No.
He said his legs were behind his ears.
No.
Yep. He was completely dislocated from the hips, legs behind his ears. I can't even, one leg was across his chest, the other one was
just like he was standing and it fell on, and
unless he fell onto his butt and then the weight popped his legs. I can't even imagine how these people ended up in the positions they ended up, but he's like, I could touch the back of my leg.
Oh!
All right. And he's in a tiny little space. Yeah. And then, many just were never heard from again. So Dr. Joe Wackerly, he is an ER doctor at Baptist Medical, and he's ending his shift when over the they have these machines. The EMTs will call and be like, there's a problem. They're like, they want to talk to you. He's like, I'm going home. They're like, they need to talk to you. He gets on the phone. They're like, there's been a collapse at the Hyatt. All he knows is he doesn't know what's going to collapse. Gets in his car, fucking flies over to the Hyatt Regency. The mayor gets a call at home, gets in his car, heads over. They call the guy, Jack Gillum, who was the architect. He flies into Kansas City. He's like, it was like a gut punch to hear that something I had designed had collapsed.
I know people get mad at them, but I'm like,
he didn't design
they
it.
can never.
Right.
I mean, you just can't.
He's going to take the fall for this.
But
something went wrong that.
I just don't think that those people could ever. They never meant for that to happen. They can never forgive themselves.
No. They are met with a scene of chaos. Dr. Wackerly goes in. He's starting to triage from inside the lobby. Eventually, you're seeing him triage out in the parking lot. Nobody can figure out what the fuck to do because these are all made with concrete. They weigh like tons and tons. Nothing. How are we going to get these people up from underneath? So they brought in a ton of like hundreds of construction workers. You see them walking in with jackhammers. It's not going to do shit.
Right.
Now the people, they're interviewing them. They're like, we're trapped in there and the water is filling. He goes, one guy's like, I'd put my head in the water, lift my head up, take a deep breath, put my head back in the water because they're going to drown.
Right.
They're like, all right, well, he's like, this is how I'm going. One guy's like, I'm trying to call my wife. She'd randomly answer me. I'm trying to, back and forth. Two of them were in there with their wives. So they eventually open the lobby doors and let the water start pouring out. I have to figure out where I'm. Okay, so they try getting these construction workers in. They're not working. They call the National Guard disaster team in. They show up with all this like moving equipment and everything, but they need something to lift. The firefighter Jack draws the life out working. Nothing's working to get this stuff up. So the mayor's like, or whoever, I think it was maybe the head firefighter, excuse me. He's like, we're going to have to bring in cranes. So they're bringing in all these cranes in. So the trapped victims, they're doing everything they can to stay alive. Mark Williams, he's next to like a 12-year-old girl. And she's saying her prayers. He's like, does it make you feel better to say your prayers? She's like, yeah, they're saying prayers together. He goes, and eventually she just stops saying her prayers. Chuck Hayes is calling for his wife, Jeannie, and she'll answer him, and then she doesn't answer him. And still, for a long time, people don't know there's anybody alive underneath the walkways yet. So these people are just kind of hanging out, nobody knowing they're there. They're just trying to lift them to see who is under there.
Right.
So rescue workers eventually are walking and calling, and they find a pocket of survivors. And they try to figure out how many are in there. So they start calling out. And at the initial count, there was 14. By the time of rescue, there's 7 left. So there's that pocket. Then like this Dalton Grant and his mother in another pocket. And I think Mark Williams is at the other end of the walkway that nobody's really paying attention to. He's I think the guy in the suitcase.
Oh, God.
So, they find those survivors. One firefighter's walking around and he's calling, and he has this kid, Dalton Grant, the 11-year-old. The guy is like this glass, and he lays down in the glass, in the debris. He did not leave that spot and talked to him through a hole till they got that kid out. So I talked about the firefighter getting on his broken glass. Okay, so by 2 a.m., so this happens at 7 o'clock at night, 2 a.m., the cranes finally show up.
Jesus.
And they have video of them just smashing through the glass walls to get the booms in to lift these things up. And they begin to lift the walkways. So the pocket of the 14 survivors are found. 7 are left, but they're all intertwined with each other. So Dr. Wackerly's like, he says, I had to make some difficult decisions to get the live out. Later in the episode, he's like, I had to dismember people to get the living out. He's like, I am haunted by the decisions I had to make that day. Eventually, Dalton's mother get out. But Mark Williams, he's off by himself, and it's just by chance somebody's walking by and I don't know if he's like, hey, anybody in there? And he hears them and he screams out. And they're like, we have somebody left. He is the last living person to be pulled from the rubble of this thing. And he's in very bad shape when they pull him out.
I can't even fathom them finding him like that.
Right.
Like, how do you look at him like that?
I think he's the one. He's in the hospital. He's like, I woke up and I remember seeing my mother there. And he said, my mother asked him, like, is he going to live? And the doctor's saying that, it doesn't look good. And he said, he doesn't remember this, but he's like, I sat up and said, I will be there for the opening of duck season. So go fuck yourselves. And went back out to sleep. He goes, I was there for the opening of duck season. And he said, my only thought in that pocket was, he's like, I could feel my legs and I knew it was bad. He's like, how am I going to duck hunt with one leg as an amputee? How am I going to do that? Well, he fucking figured it out, I guess. Dalton his mother makes a full recovery from her broken legs. That kid's in the hospital for months in a pelvic injury. Because you can imagine a pelvic injury in 1981. Yeah. Kid was in a spica cast for months. Yeah. Chuck Hayes, they pulled his wife out. She had a full body crushing injury. So her organs, everything was crushed. She is lucky to be alive. They interview her a couple of her face. Her face is all bruised. Everything. She was in rough shape. But all the people, obviously, they interview survived. I think they said 114 were killed. 200 total were injured by that. So they do, obviously, a full scale investigation of what happened. So the walkways were held up by these box beams. So let's say, walkway 4, you've got the cable coming down and it's got a bolt holding it to the box beam and it's got the washer under it. So the washer and the bolt are holding and the metal's holding over the bolt. There was supposed to be what they called, what did he call them? Stiffer plates. Steel plates were supposed to be between the bolt and the washer to support the metal, like when you look at metal, if you're building a building, it looks like an H, right? Yeah. Okay, so the screws that are holding it to the ceiling come through the middle of the H. And you would have, all right, so there's supposed to be a stiffer plate to support the weight of the washer. They didn't put the stiffer plates in. They cheaped out. Jack Gillum, the owner of the architect, he thought it was a given they would put the stiffer plates in. He never said, make sure you put stiffer plates in. They just didn't do it. So what happened is the weight of the walkways eventually brought the metal over and they just split.
Snapped.
And obviously when the 4th floor, and all of them were anchored this way, now you added all this weight over, and it's only a year before it took for them to split. The weight of the 4th just, totally takes out the 2nd. So, I'll try to see if Mike can put up what I'm trying to explain. I hope I explained it in a way, because it makes sense when you look at it. The metal just peeled over the washer. There was no way, because it needed extra support. Ultimately, Jack Gillum's company was held responsible, and $70 million went out in settlements, and all of the survivors were like, that was never enough for what those people went through. Yeah. It has remained the 2nd deadliest structure collapse until 9/11. Out of this, a lot of the emergency, they didn't have PTSD at the time, so a lot of these people were suffering PTSD.
Okay, can you imagine seeing that shit?
And they weren't even interviewed for court and stuff, because they said they couldn't make them go back and talk about what they saw. It was too gruesome. Wackerly works for the government. He does disaster management. He teaches lectures on, because they said in the beginning it was chaos, but eventually between the fire department, Wackerly, and just like the engineers and everything, it was one of the best emergency responses they had ever seen. So he now talks about that. And he's like, I didn't want to be made a hero out of this. I did this, what anybody else would have done. He's like, and I had to make some terrible decisions and I have to live with what I made. He said, a lot of them said they went home so tired they couldn't stand, but couldn't go to sleep after what they had seen. So yeah, that's it. Gillum's firm lost their license in the state, paid out $70 million, and we just needed some stiffener plates.
Yeah, just little plates.
Stiffener plates. Yep. So that was one of our death and destruction episodes, because, I find them very entertaining. Yeah. Not that I love people dying, but it's just the shit that people did, and the catastrophic problems when they cheap out or,
just always do the right thing. Always do the right thing. If you just live by those words,
I mean, I was thinking too, maybe if they didn't build the walkways out of concrete.
That's when you said that, I was like, wait, why are they concrete? I was thinking they were glass.
It's the 80s, because it was really 80s.
But I was picturing Because the wall, like I'm picturing glass, like so it's all see-through.
No, the sides of it were glass, but the walkway itself.
But I'm saying,
carpet.
like they could have done like a
I mean,
thick.
look at all the buildings in Boston and stuff.
Oh,
built
they're
around that
gross.
time. They're hideous.
I know.
Everything was fucking concrete. It was cheap and easy. All right.
And heavy.
And
very,
heavy.
very,
Very heavy. I mean, I think we have the ugliest city hall in the
Oh
country.
God, it's terrible.
It's hideous.
Terrible.
On that note.
Yeah.
So bring in your ideas. We need them. We need them. We need them.
Mm-hmm.
Summer series is coming. And have a wonderful spring.
Yeah.
It's in the air. I'm loving the spring. I'm seeing flowers.
We're almost there.
We are almost there. We're almost for the warm weather.
I know.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Like, subscribe, rate, and review the Scissors and Scrubs podcast on whatever podcast app you listen to us on. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Scissors and Scrubs. And email us any of your stories or thoughts to scissorsnscrubs@gmail.com.